Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and I just got back from the new film, The Grand Budapest Hotel. It's the latest film from Wes Anderson, since he worked on Fantastic Mr. Fox and kind of including, really. It's like Wes Anderson is making a Wes Anderson movie, like he's knowingly working within his own style, which I think works for him better than a lot of directors. Most of the time it makes them look tired and bored and really calculated and makes them look like seasoned pros that know exactly what they're doing. I think Wes Anderson is much more of a seasoned pro, but in a lot of ways I wasn't as enthralled and in love with this film as I have been with previous Wes Anderson films. Now, a lot of those films I've watched many different times, and so maybe saying that on the initial viewing doesn't mean as much. The film starts off with a young girl with a book going to a dead author's memorial. Then we cut to the author of the book, played by Tom Wilkinson, who is reminiscing about hearing a story he heard in the late 60s, and then the author is played by Jude Law, where he meets a man who owns the Grand Budapest Hotel, who is played by F. Murray Abraham. Then F. Murray Abraham tells us a story about the decadence and the former glory of the Grand Budapest Hotel in the 30s, when he was a lobby boy and the head concierge was Gustav H. And the story about how Gustav H. was framed for murder after one of his elderly guests, who he was friends with and often lovers with, dies and leaves him a famous painting, Boy with Apple, in her will. Her family is very upset about this, so he is on the run after he is framed for her supposed murder. Zero, who's the guy who F. Murray Abraham is telling the story to Jude Law, who's Tom Wilkinson, who wrote the book that the little girl is reading. Gustav H., played by Ralph Fiennes, is sent to jail, and Zero has to help him and go on a chase to try to clear his name and go on a very wacky, silly, and twee adventure in the best way that a Wes Anderson movie can do. This film, I love how well put together it is, and how all Wes Anderson films feel like well orchestrated, like train set, an elaborate train set that someone let take over their entire basement. It is elaborately choreographed to a T somehow. You definitely get the sense of an auteur when you watch Wes Anderson films, and certainly in this style, when he's doing this kind of a thing. Since he worked in animation, I've noticed more of an emphasis on the pre-production. Everything's perfectly laid out in the frame. More so in this film than I've seen in any of his films. It's so obviously labored over, it's so perfectly manufactured, but with a lot of love at the same time. You can tell he loves all these characters and the various colors. While I was watching it, I was often thinking of directors who, at a certain point, when a lot of directors, they've had a few hits, they have this reputation, and then they're making a film. I thought of like David Fincher when he made The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. He's a director who at that point knew exactly how to make a David Fincher movie. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo works perfectly in the David Fincher overture, but he's not really almost challenging himself anymore. I almost feel the same way about Spielberg in Jurassic Park, or even Hitchcock in North by Northwest. No, those are all good movies, and two of them are great movies. You can figure out which two. You never feel like the director's challenging themselves as much as their greater works, and I feel the same way about Wes Anderson. I look at this film as a very entertaining film. I really liked watching The Grand Budapest Hotel, and it definitely shows all the ideas of a director who knows exactly how to make the kind of film that people expect from him. And he does that, and he satisfies on those levels, almost like churning it out like there's a Wes Anderson studio somewhere, run by Wes Anderson. I do like Wes Anderson a lot, but I remember when I saw Moonrise Kingdom or Rushmore or Fantastic Mr. Fox, and I instantly loved those movies, and I knew I'd seen one of his best films, and I still like what he's doing with it. I loved Ralph Fiennes a lot. I've never seen Ralph Fiennes do really a comedic role before, and he was very, very funny, and he still kind of gives it all the gusto he gives in his dramatic performances. He's always known to play the bad guy, but I never really get to see Ralph Fiennes be kind of silly and not take himself as seriously, and I kind of like that about him as Gustav H. I think he's almost like a perfect actor to take on a Wes Anderson role, because he takes himself so seriously, and most Wes Anderson protagonists do take themselves very seriously, even if they are like delusional or insane or whatever. But Gustav H., takes himself and his job incredibly seriously and loves his reputation. I did like what this film does, playing with the past and the present, and especially how it works with the aspect ratio ratio, which thankfully I ended up having to see it in the very back row, which at first seemed like a hindrance, but I got to really appreciate the aspect ratio because I got to see the whole screen. So not that I ever can see the whole screen, but I got to see the whole screen very well. When it went from Academy ratio to kind of the normal aspect ratio that we're used to, using the Academy ratio for the past, which makes a lot of sense because that was kind of around that period. This film's supposed to take place in 32, was when Academy ratio came into vogue. And then when you switch to the normal kind of widescreen that we're used to in a theater setting, I think it really looked really beautiful, and it really showed the differences between the time periods by doing that. I think it's kind of a subtle change. I have read reviews where they don't mention it at all, and I've talked to people who watched it who didn't really notice it. But I think it really added to showing the differences and almost showing the past versus the present. It'll probably be a lot more noticed when it comes out on Blu-ray and DVD, especially Blu-ray probably. Wes Anderson is very indebted to the past and using like past music. None of his films I would really say are very current. They're currently released. That's probably about the only current thing about them. They don't really use a lot of current ideas. Almost looking at the past in a way that like you feel like in the past like it'll exist in a kind of timeless sphere. When you look at the past in this film, it kind of has those rose-tinted nostalgic glasses you look at the past with. It almost wants to break it and show you, you know, what happened to the Grand Budapest Hotel because of World War II and communism and everything that happened to it, and showing how this wonderful fantasy eventually died. And I'm surprised he would really, you know, for someone who loves the past so much, throughout all his films, would kind of go into that and kind of examine the past and show kind of more of a realistic, more of an adult approach, when it feels like he's kind of like a kid reading faded books in a library, imagining the past to be this fantasy world. It often feels like that, which is something I love about him. But it almost feels like he's both growing up but still using his fantasy world as well. And anytime he does too much of Wes Anderson, like Life Aquatic is easily my least favorite film he's ever made. And I always felt that was just too much Wes Anderson. When I look at the Grand Budapest Hotel, it is very much Wes Anderson doing Wes Anderson. You could say, yeah, it's too much Wes Anderson as well. But I also look at it and think he knew how to do that well. Maybe I shouldn't be so hard on it, and I should like it. And I definitely think it's a good movie, and I honestly actually want to get it on Blu-ray just to see what it'll do on my TV with that aspect ratio. I kind of like that element to it, and I like the colors to it, and I like the journey, and I love Ralph Fiennes, and I love the kid who played Zero, Tony Ravolori, I think. And everyone, you know, I like seeing F. Murray Abraham and Jude Law, and Bill Murray, of course, has a small role. Some people found all the famous cameos distracting. I didn't find them distracting, really. I'm kind of getting used to them at this point. Some of them, like Bob Balaban and Bill Murray, it feels like they're part of the Wes Anderson acting company. I did like seeing Jeff Goldblum. I think he is almost perfect for a Wes Anderson film. Willem Dafoe and Adrian Brody, his whole family look like they're right out of Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and especially Willem Dafoe. Tilda Swinton, who plays the old woman, Madame D, who's the whole subject of the whole will, was originally actually supposed to be Angela Lansbury, which is kind of disappointing because I'd love to see Angela Lansbury in a movie again. That's unfortunate, but I thought Tilda Swinton was really good. It is going more into issues that have been around through all of his filmography, and examining the past and examining these kind of nostalgic fantasies we have, and how those rose-colored glasses of looking at the past are eventually kind of shattered by the reality of the world. This film is smarter and maybe even feels like it's a little more adult, a little more analytical about the past and the nostalgia that we've often seen through his films. I don't know, I just don't love it as much. Moonrise Kingdom I saw in the theaters twice. Fantastic Mr. Fox I saw in the theaters twice. But this I just don't have that love for. I don't have that immediate, like, I want to take more people to see it. You know, I still enjoyed it quite a bit, and I still like what it was doing, and I appreciate the art direction and the cinematography and a lot about it, but I still really like the movie. I was kind of surprised I wasn't as in love with it, you know. Whether that's I've gotten sick of Wes Anderson, or that I just recently saw Moonrise Kingdom. Not that I saw it a week before or something, but this was, usually it's longer between films, and this was only about less than 2 years, really. Maybe it's that I kind of don't want him to just make Wes Anderson movies anymore. As much as I like that more than his like Life Aquatic or the Darjeeling Limited, I kind of would like him to do something a little different, and this feels to me like he's just almost being Wes Anderson. And as fun as that is, you know, I could get sick of that eventually, but I haven't yet, but I kind of feel like I could. So if you have seen the Grand Budapest Hotel and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.